Hey everyone, it's JJ and I'm on vacation right now. I need a little break with my family after all the work that was done with the late round draft guide, which by the way, that's out. You can go purchase it right now over on lateround.com. But with me being sidelined for the week, this isn't your typical becoming a best ball bro episode. Since I knew I was going to be out, my co-host Rich Ryan picked some of the best clips from the interviews that I've done over the last month and a half of the show. And he put it together for a nice little recap episode as we enter the more intense time for fantasy football drafts. That is July and August. So that's what today's episode is all about. If you've listened to all the episodes, then you've heard some of the answers already. But it can't hurt to think about everything once again. Hope you enjoy, and I hope you have a great 4th of July holiday. I'll catch you all on Tuesday. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there, but this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft a $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. 1 per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get 1 bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Pat Kerrane, owner of LegendaryUpside.com. As I've gotten into DraftKings and the platform and drafting on there, I've just noticed that I will have it's very easy to have really strong wide receivers early because running backs are being drafted early. But then at the same time, you can get caught with your pants down, if you will, where if you're in the later rounds and you're going with a more zero RB approach, those running backs just aren't available because people just keep drafting that position.
It's easy. It's much easier to be stronger at wide receiver on DraftKings. Just kind of regardless of what you're doing. If you have that as a goal, it's easier to achieve that goal on DraftKings. So I'm kind of trying to think, it's almost more like on FFPC, which tends to be a pretty running back heavy platform. I'm, kind of thinking about the best times to deviate from trying to be strong at receiver and grab the running backs, because there are going to be other wide receiver opportunities available later. Mm-hmm. One pocket for me on DraftKings is you can be sitting at the 11th round and get a receiver that you like.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of a breath of fresh air,
Yeah.
I'm not used to that. But if I know I can get that, if I know I can get wide receivers I like more in the 9th, if at the end of the 5th this morning, I got George Pickens, that's pretty sweet. I got Marvin Harrison at the end of the 3rd round instead of the beginning of the 3rd round. So there's spots where I'm okay, if I can sit here at the end of the 3rd, at the end of the 5th, if I can wait for receivers a little bit more later on, I'm not pushing guys up around ahead of where I think they should actually go. So I actually have a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. Then I can use that to my advantage by also being strong at running back. And so, you know, like I had a build this morning where I took McCaffrey. I was out of the 12 hole. I took McCaffrey. I took Brees. I took Travion Henderson, and I took DeAndre Swift. Mm-hmm. So like at every turn in the first 4 turns, first 4 pairs of picks, I took a running back. And then I didn't take my 5th running back till very late, but I basically kind of built balanced there, but I ended up feeling pretty strong at receiver because I also took a receiver with each of my first 4 pairs of picks as well. So, you know, through 8, I had 4 running backs and 4 receivers, feeling pretty good about both positions. And then I filled out the depth at receiver on DraftKings in a way that I basically don't expect to if I'm not there.
So the other thing, you know, this is kind of that point, but when you're drafting, like, are you more of a fan of doing fast drafts than slow drafts in this kind of environment because you can be more on, maybe this is wrong, but this is the way that I, after experiencing becoming a best ball bro last year and now switching over to DraftKings and trying to see what it's like here, like, I've noticed that when I do fast drafts as opposed to slow drafts, I enjoy the fast draft environment more because I have a better pulse on what's going on in that draft. If that makes, is that a proper, like, is that the way that you feel too?
That's very much the way that I feel. I would even go like a step further and say, I don't trust myself to pay like as much attention in my slow drafts. Right. Like I'll just like like you get in the mode where you're like firing in picks.
Yeah.
And I've done, you know, when I'm doing slow drafts, I'm like, I'll fire in picks and be like, wait, did that team have that guy? Because that was, you know, was I supposed to stack there? I'm pretty sure yesterday I was definitely going to stack. And then I just like fired in a running back pick without thinking. Yeah. So for me, like being dialed in, so I'm paying attention to what's happening in the draft room, but I'm just like also paying more attention to my team, what I'm trying to accomplish. I feel way more in tune with what's going on, you know, with everyone, including me, when I'm in a fast draft.
Yeah. I also think that in an environment where it does seem like people don't follow ADP as strongly, it's better to do that, to be on top of things and to do more fast drafts than slow drafts, because then you will be able to react properly and understand, oh yeah, this guy's slipping in this draft and I'll remember this, as opposed to like drafting 2 spots away from the turn and then completely forgetting that player was someone that you were targeting on the with your next pick and stuff.
So in this draft that I was doing this morning, I like set up, I had Travion Henderson. I ended up taking Kyle Williams. I had Breece Hall. I was setting up like a New England Jets thing, and Drake May goes like way ahead of ADP. So,
of course.
Like, I'm a big Drake May guy. I noticed that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
But there's one of the worst things is if you don't see that happen and you're like, oh, I'll just set up Drake May. Let me just go to take Drake May. Oh, he went around.
He's not there. Yeah.
So I do think it's paying attention to the draft is a huge edge, and I find it easier to do in a fast draft.
What about the fact that there are extra rounds? You know, different platforms you'll look at will have like 18. DraftKings has 20. With those extra rounds, how does that sort of shift your approach, or does it at all?
You know, one way that it can shift your approach theoretically is that, you know, you could do more at the onesie positions. Yeah. But on DraftKings, I find that quarterback can get pretty sketchy late in drafts. So I'm usually done at quarterback before those final rounds, but it does allow you to take 3 quarterbacks more easily, because you have, you know, that extra 20th round pick could be a 5th or 6th running back, where, you know, it might be a 4 running back build, or a 5 running back build where you don't have a ton of firepower up top if you want to try to add a 3rd quarterback. So the 3rd quarterback, it definitely makes that more comfortable, even though I'm rarely using a 19th or 20th round pick on a quarterback, if that makes sense. And then at tight end, I am more willing to just say, I'm taking a 3rd tight end in the final round, or even a 4th tight end. I'm more willing to do that on DraftKings with the 2 extra rounds to play around with. I think depending on the tournament you're in, you can also kind of take some of these bigger swings. I was going to take a Brashard Smith in the 19th round of this draft, got sniped, but that's the type of guy where I'm like, I don't know, like pretty wide open backfield. Actually, I know it's 7th round pick, but converted receiver, tested pretty well. So there's like, he could be nothing, but he could be something. And in DraftKings flagship tournament, it's a big final. You're going to need some really high scoring players. And so getting a guy who could spike out of the 20th round, even if it means taking on zero risk, is something when you have an extra couple rounds that I'm more comfortable with.
How important and vital is stacking for you? Like how much you go out of your way to get that stack going, but then also how deep do your stacks get? And I mean that from, the number of pass catchers you'll usually use. And then also, are you using running backs as part of that stack?
Yeah, I am using running backs as part of the stack. I'm willing to get fairly deep with the stacks. I'm willing to kind of team stack stuff. I'm willing to stack without the quarterback. I've written a decent amount about this because I think it really keeps you flexible. Like, I mentioned I did like a Breece Hall, Travion Henderson. Drake may get sniped. What do? I take Kyle Williams and I take Hunter Henry. Like I have a stack of a team of 2 teams that play each other in week 17. I'm hoping that game goes nuts, but I have Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, and Matthew Stafford. If I don't have Drake May, like that's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
Like I have Dak stacked up with Pickens. I've got Purdy stacked up with McCaffrey and Ayuk. I've got Stafford stacked up with Puka, Tutu, Jarquez Hunter. Like one of these quarterbacks is going off for me because they have to, because they're bringing along like first 2 picks of the draft are paired with on the same team with the quarterback. So I need those dudes. I need Puka. I need McCaffrey. So the quarterback of one of the teams is probably coming along. And if not, I even have a third option of a guy who's also stacked that can hit my lineup in a big way. But then I also am going to need, in addition to that stack going off, an enormous amount of points, like just a bunch. So let me capture several more scores all hitting my lineup together by being right about a game that goes off. And when I'm looking at that game, like if I'm looking at the Jets and the Patriots, or if I'm, looking at any other game, I'm not usually entering a draft being like, man, I really like the Bengals and the Cardinals to go nuts in week 17. Let me take that game, or let me look at the dome games and try to target those. I'm doing that less than I'm saying like, let me look at who I drafted and where I drafted them and what this team needs to happen for it to win a final that's got over 1,000 people in it.
Yeah.
This team needs Puka to go off. It needs McCaffrey to go off. Like those become pretty interesting games to stack. So these early picks that I've made, I'm more likely to try to tack on correlation and see if I can get the quarterback involved in that. But if I don't, kind of good almost, because my goal is to have all my quarterbacks stacked and additional stacking elements as well, because I'm not going to be right about all of it. I'm not even going to have to utilize all of it.
Neil Orfield, he's a DFS player who's won the Millie in the past.
I'm a pretty big proponent of zero RB anyway. And actually this year I'm doing a lot more like hero RB. I think I just got bit too hard last year by doing zero RB and everything going terribly for me last year. But yeah, I do a ton of zero and hero RB where I'm not taking more than like one running back in the first 8 rounds. And I'm definitely more comfortable with that on DraftKings and elsewhere, because you can just take several shots on players late that are, like you say, it's unpredictable when they're going to get the scoring, but hope, you take a few of them, you kind of hope that they line up well where you're getting some kind of production every week with those players. I'm definitely, I think that's probably my primary approach on DraftKings. It's maybe my primary approach everywhere, but like, especially on DraftKings, it's really tough for me to take a running back in the first round. Maybe starting kind of like the 1-2 turn, I'm more comfortable starting to take running backs, but it's I kind of need a faller to take a running back in the first round on DraftKings.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously with full PPR, and at least the research that I've done for season long and such, obviously it can be different in a best ball environment where you're getting, the best score each week, no matter what. But in your flex, you got to assume that a wide receiver is more than likely going to find that spot. So it's really like you almost have to think of it as maybe not a full 4 wide receiver start, but like a 3.8 wide receiver start. Like you're starting many wide receivers, so it does allow you to lean into zero RB a little bit more. Now over on DraftKings, you do have those extra 2 rounds too, versus a place like Underdog where there are 18. having those 2 extra rounds, does that change your approach at all? Does that make you want to go maybe lean in even further into zero RB because you can just tack on 2 random running backs at the end?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually like the primary thing that I think I do differently with the 20 extra rounds is you can often get like an RB2 on a team in the 18th, 19th, 20th rounds on DraftKings. So with the 20 rounds, you can take 8 running backs. Like, there's no problem taking 8 running backs, which you don't really want to do that in an 18 round draft, particularly, I guess half PPR doesn't really play into the equation, but in an 18 round draft, it's really tough to take 8 running backs on a team. In a 20 round draft, you can still be pretty good everywhere else and just like lean into the randomness a little bit more with taking, maybe it's your last 8 picks. You could do that. You could take your last 8 picks, all running backs, and just take a bunch of players with different archetypes. You can take players that have maybe a little bit more of a floor. A guy like Austin Eckler goes pretty late on DraftKings. There are several of those types of players that do feel like they have somewhat of a floor, and you can kind of mix in those guys with the true, like the Taj Brooks, who might be a complete zero, but like has upside potential. And you just kind of like mix in 8 of those archetypes. And like, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes you're going to really be bad, really be hurting at the running back position. But like, as many people have said, we're going to lose anyway. So why not take a shot on the upside of just betting on a bunch of those late round running backs? Take your favorites, mix in maybe a couple of the safer guys for a little bit of floor early on. I love that approach on DraftKings, particularly with the 20 round draft. So that's one of the primary things that I do. I like 3 quarterbacks in general. Like even in 18 round drafts, I probably average 2.5. Like I take 2 or 3, basically always. In a 20 round draft, I want to take 3 quarterbacks. Like that is, one of the things that I'm generally going to be targeting on DraftKings is a 3rd quarterback. You can't really take them later on because all the quarterbacks, as you know, on DraftKings get eaten up really early. It's tough to find late round quarterbacks that maybe there's a couple, but you need to take them a little bit earlier. But you can take those 3 quarterbacks and just know that there are going to be kind of those long shot running backs available later on for you, or wide receivers, tight ends, whatever. But you're more able to build with 3 quarterbacks on DraftKings for the 20 rounds. And then I'd say the only other thing that I do a little bit more often in a 20 round draft is I will sometimes take 4 tight ends. Still not something that I do like most of the time, but it's not uncommon for me to take four late tight ends on DraftKings.
You did mention quarterbacks and going with 3 quarterbacks. I found it just really strange over on DraftKings going through drafts and like, there are certain guys, like I've gotten a ton of Drake May, for instance, over on DK just because of where he sort of sits and where his tier is in the pocket and where he goes. But to me, it kind of seems like there isn't a big enough gap between some of the higher end, decent pocket passer types to that next tier to then the next tier. Because there have been instances, and maybe people who are listening have experienced this as well. And I'm coming at this again. I'm trying to become a best ball bro here. So I'm just talking to you about my experience. And I want Neil, as someone who's more experienced, to be able to say, yeah, I've seen that too. That makes sense, yada, yada, yada. But it seems like if you're relying on a 3 quarterback build, right? You have 2 guys who are, more of like high end 2s or maybe low end QB1s, and you're trying to get this 3rd quarterback, and you're eyeing that tier of like Sam Darnold, Bryce Young, that grouping. It seems like every time you think they're going to be available, they end up not being available by the time you end up picking. And it's like they're that tier, that final grouping at quarterback seems to be elevated like too much, like just a little bit too much. Is that something that you've experienced as well? Like, am I going crazy? Because it feels like every time I need that 3rd quarterback, I'm only stuck with like Aaron Rodgers crossing my fingers or a Giants quarterback, right? Whereas I feel like the other guys should be pushed down a little bit more than they are.
Yeah. So, as a more experienced best ball player, I mean, I've been playing best ball for 5 years. I started playing when it became popular. So like, I'm still very much in the learning phase. And I think that we're having kind of the same experience where it's like every year the landscape changes and doesn't always make sense. And I think quarterback on DraftKings is like the best example there, because in theory, like quarterback is less important on a full PPR site. Like they don't really get receptions. So quarterback should be less important. They should generally go later. That is not the experience that I have had on DraftKings at all. People go quarterback crazy. They really the middling quarterbacks go a lot earlier than I think they should. The bad quarterbacks, all of them get moved up on DraftKings, at least in some drafts. Like the ADP is actually not always entirely crazy, but yesterday I was in a draft where I set up several of those later options, like the Matt Stafford, Geno Smith, had several stacks that I was like, okay, I'm going to get one of these quarterbacks at the next turn. And then they were all gone. It was people taking their fourth quarterback, or like they have two elites and they tack on a third, just like completely unstacked. Like you just really can't predict anything on DraftKings. So it's a lot harder to do that. But it is something that I'm toying with, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, which is I kind of think if everybody's going to be forcing up all of the middling or bad quarterbacks, it just makes me want to take those elite quarterbacks early on. Like, why do I want to take, Joe Burrow is like a good quarterback. I don't want to call Joe Burrow a middling quarterback, but like for fantasy, he kind of is. So like, why do I want to take Joe Burrow around after where I can get Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts or one of these elite quarterbacks? So I think, and honestly, I've only started doing DraftKings drafts. I've only got like 5 under my belt, but I kind of think that's kind of the direction I'm moving in, is just taking those elite quarterbacks. And then, later on when other people are scrambling to get those bad quarterbacks, reaching for a Geno Smith, then I can take, a pretty good wide receiver. I can take a Kyle Williams. I can take one of those mid-round running backs who I think have a lot of value. And I'd take that 2v2 any day with my elite quarterback and an Austin Eckler versus whoever they take in the early round. I think generally it's a good idea to take one of those top quarterbacks and let other people reach and kind of push up the bad and middling quarterbacks. I do think like that is something that I think we're going to have to consider more and more on DraftKings, which feels really counterintuitive to me on a full PPR site to want to take Lamar Jackson, or I know I listen to your podcast, Jalen Hurts. I agree with you. Like it's tough to not want to take Jalen Hurts where he's going. Any of those kind of elite quarterbacks, they feel pretty good when just having at least one of them early on, so you don't have to scramble to get a quarterback later and reach ahead of where you want to on one of those later guys.
Liam Murphy, he's the owner of BeatBestBall.com. He's been a multiple best ball champion, including 2 high stakes wins over on DraftKings.
What should happen is quarterbacks should go later on PPR sites, right? And quarterbacks should go earlier on half point PPR sites. But when a quarterback scores 40, that's hard to pick up the pace in a half point from your skill position players. What actually happens on DraftKings, in my experience, is a different story, right? DraftKings is a huge platform, which is part of the benefit, right? Everyone knows what DraftKings is. You got some people loading up a draft and being like, let me get my quarterback. Let me get my Giants quarterback in the first round. Like that will happen. And God bless those people. We want that. Right. But in my experience, what actually happens on DraftKings is if you are not vigilant to the room, if you're not looking at the room, quarterbacks will fly off the board. It also tends to be a site where running backs go earlier. In a vacuum, obviously we want the players who catch passes more. Right. But you kind of have to treat it room by room. Some rooms are pretty uniform. Some rooms can get pretty chaotic where, I did a DraftKings 5-5-5 draft last weekend, my first one of the year, trying to defend that championship. And
that's right. Yeah.
One of the drafters took 6 running backs and 1 wide receiver through 7 rounds. And then his quarterback room was 4 quarterbacks. You ready for this quarterback room? It was Aaron Rodgers, Joe Flacco, Mac Jones. The quarterbacks were, he punted off quarterback and he had no starters left other than maybe Aaron Rodgers, probably Aaron Rodgers, but who even knows there, right? Like I got Tyler Shuck before him. And so he got like Jackson Dart, Rodgers, Flacco, and maybe, and Shadur. So it's like he's got 2 swings at the Browns quarterback and probably not even starting. Another drafter in that room took 4 quarterbacks as well. So it's like I built a 0 RB team with Jamar Chase, Rashee Rice, Trey McBride, and then I got Devonta Smith, Tet McMillan, Olave, and Jordan Addison. And, I was trying to get running backs, but like the room was hoarding it. So I just had to adjust. And I ended up building a 3 quarterback, 9 running back, 6 wide receiver, 2 tight end room. And my running back room is, I got Miles Sanders in there. We just got a lot of bullets there. that's a long answer. I don't even know I answered yourself, but like obviously the skill players, they score more points on PPR sites because they catch balls, and that's how the scoring system works.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that what you bring up is really important, that on DraftKings, like if you are used to other, like playing on Underdog or something where things seem to be very structured, let's say, and it's sort of people falling in line with ADP. There's and this is something that's been consistent and consistently said, is that on DraftKings you see a lot of takes and picks more all over the place. Do you find that you like that because you can take advantage of that more and you can think more on the fly? Like, you going with a 9 running back build obviously is not a common build whatsoever, but what you're obviously doing in that scenario is reacting and saying, okay, I didn't spend up any draft capital on running back early, so I'm going to get a quantity instead of the quality of the position later. Do you think that you personally have an advantage of that? Do you think that others, if they studied the game, would have an advantage in doing that too?
I mean, generally my viewpoint about best ball is like why I like it is the more decisions we need to make continuously, like I'm going to have an advantage because I think I make good decisions, right? So it's like, I like that we have to make 20 individual decisions versus a daily fantasy lineup where you can click, generate my lineup for me. You didn't even make a decision. The computer made a decision for you, right? Like, I like that you have to adapt on the fly. This is why I do pretty strictly all fast drafts, right? Like, the better. And I like that we're making these decisions and adjusting to the rooms. And like, look, it's not always going to work, right? Like my 9 running back room, I might not have even gotten, like Jordan Mason's my RB1. So it's like, it might not work out, folks, right? But you got, when you're drafting enough teams, so if you want to draft a high, quantity of teams, try a lower buy-in if you don't have a big bankroll, right? But like, you got to try different builds. You like, I think what happened last year with a lot of people is we've seen the success of zero running back year to year. And all of a sudden, like 70% of the field was building zero running back teams. Mm-hmm. And it was a bad year to build zero running back just because of how the scoring went. So it's like, you got this mega calamity where it's like everyone's doing the same thing and it was a bad year to do it. And this is why you should vary your build somewhat.
So you brought up zero RB. I know you've been an advocate of zero RB in the past. Is that something that you find easier to do, that you're more comfortable with on DraftKings, specifically this season? Because, through my season long analysis, there's a lot of recency bias that goes on with ADP where, if there's a good running back season the previous year, then there's a higher ADPs with running back the next season. And, same thing with other positions, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that that's going to spill over year in the best ball scene? And is that easier then for you to say, no, you know what? I'm not going to go running back because this is a full PPR platform and running backs are going way too early in my opinion. So I'm going to build more zero RB teams this year on a platform like DraftKings.
So I don't like try to build like on DraftKings. I don't build like a wildly different portfolio of teams versus on a half point site, right? Like I'm still mixing it. In general, I always believe in the concept of zero RB because it's very easily, to conceptualize when it would be the best build, right? Like wide receiver is almost always the scarcest position as far as like wide receivers who truly matter. We know it's a skill-based position, right? Where it's like you can give Andre Yoshivas a million routes. He's not going to be Jamar Chase, right? Like he's just not. Where, if Zach Moss was getting 40 touches a game, okay, yeah, he could do. He's not as fast as Chase Brown, but he could do 90% of Chase Brown, right? So all you need, CMC goes down week 1. Derrick Henry goes down week 4. Whatever. James Cook holds out. Alvin Kamara hits the age cliff. All you need is a couple of these things to go. You take a swing at the backup. You happen to be right. Now you have a locked-in starter where you didn't pay the draft capital. So, yeah, I still believe in the concept of zero RB on DraftKings heavily. However, I will note, I generally advise people to, like, the way I like to approach it is there's not a ton of running backs I love, but I do like a lot of I love Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like, I love guys like this. So my general advice is you should be, if you like a Jahmyr Gibbs, if you like an Achane, if you like a Derrick Henry, if you like a Saquon, maybe you break the tie towards that running back early, because I promise you there are going to be wide receiver values in round 11, round 12, round 13 that you're not used to seeing on a half point PPR site, where it's like you're going to get Rashid Shaheed in the 140s. You're going to get Luther Burden goes 30 picks later on DraftKings, right? Like you're going to get these guys here. So it's like, I'll, CeeDee Lamb versus Jahmyr Gibbs. I like them both a lot, but maybe I'll take Gibbs a little bit more often on DraftKings just to give me one anchor. And then I still know I'm going to build such a strong wide receiver room because for whatever reason, wide receiver goes like super late on DraftKings.
Historically, like even beyond this year, like has elite quarterback been a direction that you've gone in best ball?
I would say in general, I've been into the elite quarterbacks. This year, DraftKings is a different market. Like Josh Allen was my quarterback the year I won BBM2. Patrick Mahomes in the 4th round was my quarterback when I won the 555 one year, right? Like, so it's like in general, I do like elite quarterback because what I really like is I don't want to build every team 3-6-8-3, which three quarterbacks, 6 running back, 8 wide receivers, 3 tight ends. That's like base normal draft capital just from there if you're new to best ball. But like I like going only 2 quarterbacks. And if a guy gets hurt, so be it. But like, I want the extra stab at landing a difference maker skill player. And so this year, like the elite quarterbacks, I'm not taking them in the 2nd round, like where they will go some years on or some drafts on DraftKings.
Yeah.
But at that 3-4 turn, Lamar, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, like, I want some access to these guys because in any given year, they can realistically just go like 30, 40, 40. And you're like,
and you know who they are, right? Like we know that it's them that are going to be the ones that are doing that.
Yeah. Like it's no mystery. And all you really need is you need the skill players around them to not be the skeleton keys. Like,
right.
Okay. Right. So like if you take Josh Allen over Mike Evans and you need Mike Evans, you lose,
Yeah.
So be it. But I would say like I don't feel that like Herbert, Purdy, Caleb, all the quarterbacks in there, I don't feel like they're inappropriately priced. Like I don't feel like it's not like some years where it's like the elites go in the 3rd round and then those guys go in like the 6th round. That's like, well, I mean, I only got to pay 2 more rounds to get the QB1 instead of the QB15. Like it is appropriate price. So like, I am making most of my teams getting like a Bo Nix and a Kyler, a Justin Fields and a Purdy, a Caleb and whatever. But like, I always want, I'm a Bills fan, so I got to have some Josh Allen. I personally, though, would have Josh Allen QB3 this year. After Lamar and I'm just worried. Like, there's got to be one year. I don't know if it's this year, but like, he's not going to just steal 15 rushing touchdowns every year. Like, they're not going to need him to do that. They're going to save it for the playoffs sometimes. And I'm just getting a little like 6th sense. Like Jaden, he's going to have to rock it off like 25 points a game.
Emo Cowboy, when you look at how best ball drafters just typically and generally draft, what's the one thing that you believe they do incorrectly sort of in sum and altogether?
This was a tough one. I never do good with pick one because I love
You can pick many. You can pick many.
I think the one that struck me the most when I look back the last few years of playing best ball, I try to do like a lessons learned every offseason. And I'm like, what do I want to fix? What do I want to adjust? And the thing I've been harping on lately is that I don't think we do a good enough job as drafters to like draft like we're right. We say that a lot, but I notice a lot. I see it in chats. I see it in, forums, Discord, everybody talking about it. You get halfway through and too many teams are like, oh, well, what if I got this wrong? I think drafting like you're right is so key because there's going to be so much variance and chaos that happens over the course of a 17-week season in fantasy. We see it week to week all the time, but we get comfy that we're confident in how things are going to work out now. And the overconfidence thing is part of that aspect. But I think it's key that for that team, for that room, drafting like you've selected correctly and following through. When people talk about like telling a lineup story, I think part of the key of that is that it's consistent with how you're building it and you're trusting that you've hit on the right guys, you've attacked the right archetypes, or that, the injuries or opportunities are going to benefit who you've added to this roster. You're not double counting or getting like, oh, I need a third quarterback because what about an injury? Well, draft like you're right. And if a third quarterback comes up that stacks, cool. We know that's good for the team, but you're not shoving something into a team because you're getting doubts halfway through the room. And I think that's easy for first timers, but also for people that like, you just get so much information throughout this offseason. And I think you start to kind of doubt or do anything like that. And that's just something I've noticed that I'm like, I want to trust my construction and my players that I've gotten it right and hope, cards fall where they may. But I've been challenging myself to quality over quantity at the positions that I've allocated correctly and just trusting that, not just throwing something on because it makes me feel better. I'm going to challenge myself that I've gotten things correct thus far because we don't need to be perfect. We need to be close enough and then just get lucky. And I try to remind myself that because I am someone that likes to be very precise, very accurate and nail everything. I'm just not.
Yeah. When you say that you should be drafting as if you're right, I'm assuming, and I think people would have this question too, is that you're focused more on the early rounds of your draft and in the middle of your draft when you're saying something like that. So if you get through round, is there a point in time where, you're not in the late rounds necessarily covering your bases with what you did early, but you are drafting in the late rounds to just expand that portfolio and expand the range of outcomes and stuff of how your lineup can be effective based on what goes down in the season. But I'm assuming that what you're saying is more focused on those early rounds. And is there a point in time where you're not thinking about that as much?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if I'm taking a lot of receivers early, I'm going to need less of them because I've allocated that. If I took running backs early, I don't need to feel like I'm getting left behind at RB 3, 4, 5 because, I've gotten 2 guys I trust that are my anchor points. And I think one thing we don't do well enough is like correlation, like mining that comes in a lot of different forms and formats. And what's still really important is just hitting on league winners. And we know that a lot of league winners come from these late round guys because of injuries, because of, unforeseen circumstances. And so giving ourselves as many shots at mining those and not getting distracted with trying to maybe, backfill something that, we already basically took care of. We filled out our starting lineup early on, ideally, or we established this is where I want to be strongest. And now it's just addressing everything else as it's going. Really. And I think part of that also comes from like building a team backwards. Like as you're getting your early picks, you're starting to see where is this going to go? And every draft room is going to be differently, but where is this going to go and how is this going to fit into what I've already done? Right. And I think that allows you to be flexible as well with how those rooms play out.
Yeah.
Because getting through those rooms might be tougher than others. You get in some really sharp rooms. And I think that's where you might feel like, oh man, am I getting left behind here? Just trust that you've allocated it correctly thus far. And it's kind of like, I remember my dad, like how I got taught how to drive. It was like, hey, don't focus on right in front of you. That's how you get in a wreck. That's how you're going to miss something. Keep looking like way ahead, several cars ahead. That's how you're going to get that bend. That's how you're going to get that turn. And I think drafting like that with a next few rounds, full thing. How do I want to see this roster play out as best I can? And I'm going to veer through traffic as needed with how I need to do that and not get hyper focused on like this round or this player. Those are the drafts I feel most secure about. And I think if you're doing a portfolio, I think that's how you're going to build the strongest portfolio you can, which is really the only way you can play this game. Yeah. Like to see results, year over year.
I do want to ask though about mobile quarterbacks versus non-mobile quarterbacks in best ball, because something that I've sort of toyed with and, I've researched a little bit is the fact that like the reason we love mobile quarterbacks in season long is because we're getting that really nice predictable floor from them. And then if they give us a good passing season in some way, and we get these unicorns now, we have Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, hopefully, and then Jalen Hurts. They can post pretty good passing numbers while also posting good rushing numbers. But the rushing numbers are really getting, Justin Fields into the conversation every week, regardless of how good or bad his passing numbers are. That's like the Terrell Pryor of old, way back in the day. And Tim Tebow and these guys who were giving you some sort of ground game work, but maybe not a ton through the air. But in best ball, since you're not having to predict that output, do you think that pocket passers might actually be a little, I don't want to say undervalued necessarily by the market, but are they at least more viable and maybe we shouldn't be targeting the mobile quarterbacks as heavily? Or is there still, a lot of good in targeting the mobile quarterbacks? Because from a season long perspective, we do know who those mobile quarterbacks are going to be.
Yeah, I think this is a fun question because I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like, it depends, right? Because there are different types of mobile quarterbacks. There are there are your Burrows, your Strouds, your Daks that they can scamper for 20 or 30 yards, your random touchdown every now and then. And then you've got pocket passers like Stafford that, if you want to take his weekly prop of under 1.5 rushing yards, which I did often last year, it's like, so you've got different tiers of this mobile guys. I'd say that like it's price driven, right? Because I think at a certain point, rushing without a pass ceiling isn't as fruitful for like total projected points. Like you're right. Really just hoping for the volatile output. And how much different is that than hoping for the volatile output of a pocket passer that doesn't often, exceed 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns to do so. So I think at the end of the day, I still find them a super strong target because I think they're one of the easiest bets to outproduce their ADP simply because they just rush for more touchdowns and yards than we thought. And that can happen a variety of ways if they're like a high rushing quarterback. I think one of the ways to do that, and there's been a lot of great, studies that have been done on this, is just like rookie and early career quarterbacks. We just see those guys tend to scramble more often. And then for a lot of them, it really ticks down historically over the rest of their career, anecdotally, as they learn more of the offense, they become a more accurate passer with better footwork, better timing in the system, more confidence in the pass plays, etc. And then even just like protecting themselves, like being able to control the hits and all, things like that. So I think one of the reasons I still want to go after these rushing guys is because typically, they don't project as good of passers. And if they're a much better passer than we think, then like this huge, Jayden Daniels, a great example. Like I still thought his price was super friendly just because of the rushing. And collegiately, we saw a very, very shockingly good passer, deep and from an accuracy standpoint. And if the market was deciding this is just a running quarterback, we're gonna, if the market's gonna undervalue a rusher's passing ceiling that we have confidence could be much stronger than it is, then I think that's even a better bet. But then in the Fields example, we've got a lot of data that Fields is a pretty bad passer. And the offense then structurally is limited because we're rarely going to see games where he's got a lot of pass attempts. Whereas a competent passer has more access to those like high pass volume games where he also adds with his legs. Yeah. So I think I like digging in the weeds on these, every player and every instance in themselves. And so I do think blanket statement rusher, I think we tend to overstate what that really means. And I think also like not every coaching staff is buying into that. I think a really good example of that was like Herbert last year. The market was too down on, and myself included, on like what the pass rate could truly be in this offense with these pieces. But then Greg Roman, a coach that had no problem utilizing his quarterback's legs historically, and a quarterback we'd seen have in his rookie season a pretty nice rushing floor, and then collegiately being a strong rusher. And then, all those pieces coming together were like he had some of his highest ceiling games because he was able to unlock that next ceiling with this rushing work. And so I do think these are absolutely going to be targets. And I think it's a better thing to be like, if I don't have a strong lean on these guys, I think to maybe split hairs and do a tier. Because ultimately basketball is about ceiling, right? Yeah. And just guys that can access ceiling are going to be, or a higher ceiling are going to be much more powerful. And at the end of the day, the rushers are just going to be able to do that because of volatility. And it also makes them easier to not have to stack, right? Like if a guy does have a rushing component to it, he can get there without carrying along a lot of his other guys. And I think in DK specifically, it's going to be hard to correlate. It's going to be hard to stack. And one of the ways you can alleviate yourself of trying to reach out of structure or out of ADP to do so on a regular basis is just saying that like, I don't need to have a bunch of stacked guys with these mobile aspect quarterbacks. And to me, that alleviates the stress of having to kind of nail the puzzle all the time.
Mike Leone from Establish the Run. Can you talk about week 17 a bit? This has been a question that a lot of folks have come to me about. I think that intuitively people understand that it makes sense because, it's the final week of the season and, in these tournament environments, we want the most upside. But you've done a lot of work also on week 15 and 16, not just week 17. So just kind of talk about it. Talk about these playoff weeks and the importance of them and how much you weigh them. And if you think you weigh them more or less than other drafters do.
Yeah, it's a pretty nuanced conversation because like, I think there's people that like maybe go overboard with week 17 with the idea being like, okay, that's where the money is. That's what we got to play for. We got to optimize for week 17 because we're trying to win first place. But I think the point that misses is we're building our teams now, not in week 17, and your expected value and your odds of winning are impacted by your odds of advancing, the first weeks 1 through 14 and weeks 15 and week 16 as well. So I push back a little bit on like that's where the money is. So that's where you have to build for. I think that's not totally correct, but at the same time, if you look at the Million Maker on DraftKings, I believe it's about a little over 1,000 people in that final. If you're going to beat that many people, you probably want some correlation in your lineup.
Yeah.
And not only in week 17, but I think about it in terms of making sure you stack your team in general, having multiple stacks to get you through 3 kind of weeks that are non-continuous. You're starting over. You advance out of the regular season. You got to win week 15. Then you got to win week 16. Then you got to win week 17. And one way to do that is to have multiple quarterbacks stacked, where maybe one stack hits in week 15, different stack hits in week 16, and then you can kind of ping pong that in week 17. Maybe helps you get some unique combinations through to that final week. But as far as completing a game stack, which I consider to be at least one same team pass catcher stacked with your quarterback and one opponent coming back, the data I've seen, which has been more geared to like half PPR sites, because DraftKings hasn't, released the full data, though I think this year they may be. That shows if you have 3 quarterbacks game stacked, like the odds of winning a finals, can increase as much as like 20% over average. If you don't have any of your quarterbacks stacked, your odds of winning the finals is going to be below average. And then 1 quarterback stacked is kind of like neutral, and 2 is very good as well in terms of game stacks on a specific week. So it is important that correlation does matter. It just kind of, you don't want to go overboard with it. And you brought up weeks 15 and 16. That's important to stack for too, but it's not as much fun to think about. So it gets overlooked. So if everyone's trying to complete these week 17 game stacks, which, the DraftKings tournament's big enough. I don't know if you have to overly worry about like the combined ownership rates, but maybe a little bit. Mm-hmm. But people aren't doing it for weeks 15 and 16. So maybe your bang for your buck is actually better game stacking there, where people aren't doing it and you're getting these correlations that the field isn't going to have. The reason why it's a little bit less important is because you're advancing 1 out of 12 in weeks 15 and 16, as opposed to trying to win 1,000 person field.
Right.
So I talked a lot there about it. But one final note, I will say, like, always completing an additional team stack is important, more important than completing a game stack. Like, if I've got CJ Stroud stacked and I've got Trevor Lawrence unstacked, it's more important for me to draft a pass catcher with Trevor Lawrence to complete that stack than it is to get an opponent of CJ Stroud's in week 17, because those team stacks are going to help you advance in the regular season, weeks 15, week 16, and week 17.
Yeah. And speaking of those team stacks, I remember years ago when you first did your first like big study on stacking, because we were texting about it and stuff, and I had used and referenced it on a mailbag episode. And one of the things that you brought up in that, because it was more, it was actually like sort of season long focused and stuff too. I remember, like, it wasn't only like a best ball focused thing. I think it was just season long. But one of the notes that you made in that study and in that research was that, and I try to apply this when speaking about this in best ball too. But when people are stacking, especially in best ball, they think about the weekly upside only, right? But there's also the season long upside, where if you hit on the stack, that ends up just the offense in general ends up outperforming expectation by a whole lot, then your team is going to outperform expectation generally. You'll have better odds to outperform expectation. So like going back to your Houston example, if you have CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, and Jaden Higgins, let's say, and you get them all at ADP, but obviously you're going to get, weekly spikes whenever, Nico Collins has 2 touchdowns and CJ Stroud throws 4 and the other 2 are to Jaden Higgins, let's say. In a perfect world for your team, you get that weekly spike. But what if Houston is the team that ends up outperforming expectation on a touchdowns per game rate by a whole lot? Then all of a sudden you're going to get that more frequently. And then if you get that more frequently, then you're going to outpace, expectation in the way that other teams are performing as well. I think that's something that often goes sort of untalked about with stacking in general.
Yeah, and to expand on that, I think sometimes people think about only the upside component of why we correlate, but there's also an odds of getting things right in terms of why we correlate. You do what you just said with Houston. You have to get one thing right, and you've gotten 3 spots that have paid off on ADP, as opposed to like, if you have a lot of hubris and you're like, well, no, this is the best receiver to take in this round. This is the best quarterback to take in this round. And like, yeah, I've got Stroud, but I like, this other rookie receiver better than Higgins. You're fighting an uphill battle. You've got to get 3 things right now, whereas I might only have to get 1 thing right to have it pay off. And you have to think through each draft. Again, and what you were saying too is like, if you're building a portfolio of drafts, you got to treat each draft like individually. That doesn't mean you have to bet on Houston in all your drafts, but in this draft, that's the bet you've made, and you do want to lean into that.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep talking about stacking. I want to ask you 2 questions into one because I'm making things more and more complicated for you throughout today's show. With stacking, should you, number 1, include running backs and that's in those stacks? But then number 2, there's been a lot of chatter over the last couple of years, and I know that ETR has done some research and some work on this, but stacking backfields. So let's say getting Bayshal Tutin and Travis Etienne as opposed to just, placing a bet on one of those players in a particular draft. So are you, when you're stacking, should people be leaning into running back as well in those stacks? And then the second point and the second question is, what about getting multiple backs when they're cheaper out of those backfields?
First off, what we just said about the seasonal correlation with the team really applies to the running back position as well. If the offense rolls, everybody rolls. So yeah, I think from an advance rate perspective, you want to include running backs in your stack because again, you're just betting on that offense. I was just talking to Thorman over at ETR about something this morning, and he's looking at the TDs over expected leaders. Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, all in the top 20, because the Lions, went nuts. So keep that in mind. I also think sometimes for the weekly upside component, people want to avoid stacking running backs with the quarterback because kind of the mindset's very narrow of like, this is a passing script or this is a rushing script. And there's some truth to that, certainly. It is definitely less valuable from a weekly upside component. But as someone who's like messed around with DFS sims and has played a lot of DFS over the years, you'd be amazed how many weeks are decided by like one team just really outperforming all the other teams and the running back being included in there in a build that you would think, oh, I can't build that because we're like so narrow-minded thinking, Jared Goff throws this game, so it's got to be Sam Laporte and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I can't have David Montgomery in here. Right. And then they score 45 points. And so I think that part's overblown. I do want to say, as much as we're hyping up stacking, point that Justin Herzig made on DraftKings, it's maybe a touch less important than other sites because you get the full PPR scoring and you get those 100-yard bonuses. Some of these volume driven up kind of stats sort of diminish the stacking because the touchdown components, Stroud throwing a touchdown to Nico Collins. And then both getting those touchdown points a little bit diminished when, Puka can go, 10 for 100 and a game the Rams stink. A little bit less important.
Yeah, a little bit. Right.
Just a little bit. But as far as taking running backs together, I want to look at this closer. I looked at this really closely for a single year a few years ago, and it was kind of interesting to look at. And what I had found was these running backs that were a little bit cheaper, think a running back with around 4 to 6 tag and a running back with maybe around 8 to 13 tag, where they kind of had distinct roles in the offense. Maybe one was the 2-down rusher with touchdown upside. The other guy was kind of the pass catching upside. Pairing those together worked pretty well, where you're kind of ping-ponging weeks based on how the game script goes for the team. And then they each do have this kind of contingency upside if the other one gets hurt. But it's got to be pretty clear, like, what the roles are and that there's not a third annoying back that's going to come in because, part of that bet is if running back B gets hurt, running back A, has this upside that you want to have. It seemed to matter, handcuffing seemed to matter a little bit less in like the orthodox handcuff situations. That would be kind of like taking Saquon Barkley first overall and maybe, Will Shipley. Because you're like, if Barkley gets hurt, I got to take Will Shipley. With the 20 rounder, there's a little bit more room for that. Again, you can get more creative, but I don't go out of my way to do that. Now, the ambiguous backfields, which is what you asked about with Jacksonville, the advance rates and whatnot weren't great in terms of pairing those backs together. Again, small sample, I want to look at it again. But those backfields generally had one guy who had a really good advance rate.
Right.
So they're just good backfields to target.
Right.
And again, your bet in a draft doesn't have to be your bet everywhere. If Tuden falls and I take him, I don't know if I want to pair him with ETN. I might just want to make my bet on Tuden in this draft. But another draft, I might make that bet on just ETN.
Right.
So over your portfolio, I think it makes a ton of sense to be investing in these ambiguous backfields, especially if you think, like Tank Bigsby's out and it's going to be one of these two guys.
Right.
But within a single draft, probably not going out of my way to handcuff them. One caveat is I will try anything if the value is really good. If I get ETN around pass value and I can get Tuten around pass value, I'm going to pair them together in that situation.
Check it all out, lateround.com. Make sure you're subscribed and make sure you check out the YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/@lateroundff. As always, everyone, thanks for tuning in.